Okay, thanks. Yeah, so just to follow on from where Terry was actually, as he was saying, we're trying to pull together. So sorry, I'll start where I should start. So my name's Stuart Jackson. I lead on innovation and skills at Transport Scotland. Thanks, Dan, for this session so far. It's been a really interesting session overall. I think what is clear is there's quite a few people on different journeys at different parts of the supply chain. So this is what Dan, myself and Terry have recognised quite regularly. Different companies are moving from the R&D phase all the way through manufacturing and validating the products in the market. So what we're trying to do, just to touch back on Terry's point, is we're trying to work across the whole of the transport ecosystem and provide better guidance really as to wherever you are on that journey, that there should be some support for you. So as you can see at the top there's a range of organisations from all the universities all the way through to manufacturing support, and then validation support for products going into the market as well. If you've got any questions on any of those, Dan, myself, Terry are happy to answer and come back, but hopefully it gives you an understanding of where things are. In terms of the funding down the bottom, you can see, Energy Technology Partnership there is covering sort of the engagement with the academic community, if you like, and where it's a good source for companies to engage through. They run things like knowledge transfer partnerships and things like that, where you can go and work directly with universities. However, if you look over the Innovate UK, Scottish Enterprise areas there, you can see that there's a range of funds in those bars that cover the sort of the technology readiness levels of 3 to 8. So essentially coming out from basic research into more applied research, demonstration, testing, and validation. And as Terry said, we've got some funding there, as we've just heard, looking at a feasibility stage. As Dan mentioned, there's also some other funding looking at demonstration for certain vehicle types of 40-ton, 44-ton vehicles. But there's some gaps in that chain, and essentially it's with that in mind that we've launched the Zero Emission Mobility Innovation Fund. So if we can go to the next slide, please. What we've done here, which we can share about afterwards, is essentially thought of any transportation company in Scotland and thought about the 3 key assets that you have, essentially the vehicle or component development, your product development, if you like, the site that you've got where you're making the vehicles, and then the people as well. And as you can see, for different technology readiness levels and depending on the sectors, there's a range of funds from Research Council funding that goes back into supporting companies in their engagement with universities, through European funding, through to things like we heard earlier about the Niche Vehicle Network, NVN, the ATF fund that Dan's mentioned in his pack as well. So as you can see, there's a range of funds in there, but where the Zero Emission Mobility Innovation Fund is coming in is very much focused within the vehicle space, so components and systems to develop vehicles as well as vehicles themselves. But looking at that sort of later stage, that closer to market stage, and we're beginning essentially with focus on heavy duty vehicles and niche vehicles. But as you'll see, we are evaluating that, and whether or not we then move into aerospace and marine, that's something which we may look at later on as well. So if we go on to the next slide, it gives you a bit more detail about what this fund is. Just wait for it to move through. Are you on it, Dan? Thank you. So ZEMIF essentially is a fund designed for the transport sector. It's about trying to scale the manufacturing of components, systems and vehicles, as well as supporting the deployment and testing of vehicles as well. Initially focusing the niche and heavy duty vehicle sector. It's a 4-year fund, about 7 million a year. But this fund doesn't have any deadlines, and the purpose for that is so that it can align to company's own development pathways and timeframes, and there's no explicit minimum or maximum budget size. So essentially it's done on a business case approach. So if you say how the funding will allow you to develop new vehicles, new systems and components in ways that you couldn't do otherwise, and that there's a good case for why you need that funding, then then it'll be part of the business case, and therefore could be eligible for funds. The funding is being provided by Transport Scotland and administered by Scottish Enterprise. So if you look back at Terry's slides, which he's detailed a lot about the eligibility, eligible costs, the types of questions that are being asked, all of those are very similar for this fund. Again, the details are on Scottish Enterprise's website. After 6 months, we will be then having a review to see whether or not this fund could be broadened. So if there's a lot of interest in the feasibility funding that Terry mentioned in the maritime and aviation sectors, for instance, we may actually widen the scope of this fund as well to look at the development of the manufacturing of those components or the near market testing of those. So let's dive into a couple of bits of detail. There's 2 more slides left. Dan, if you can move on, please. The first strand of this fund is called Innovation to Manufacture. And essentially it's about taking, if you've already got a prototype vehicle, component or system or subsystem, and you want to start manufacturing it at small scale, so we want to start taking it out from a prototype and start thinking about how you're going to manufacture that, then this fund is for you. This is essentially moving from TRL 6 all the way through to defining how your manufacturing lines want to operate, what that will look like, how you will look at the total cost of production, and make sure that your product is actually competitive. So that's what this strand is focused on. Essentially, it's for any business based in Scotland of any size. So you can be a larger firm or an SME. And essentially, as long as you are based in Scotland, you can apply either directly or you can apply as part of a consortium. That could include universities, if you want to do the R&D about the processing line, and for instance, organisations like the National Manufacturing Institute, for instance, may be a good place to find support, for instance. But essentially, you can apply on your own or in collaboration for that. But as I said, the main thing is you have a prototype that you're ready to scale. As you can see at the bottom, there's a few different example projects down the bottom there as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea. For instance, number 2 there, if you have a component for charging infrastructure, EV charging infrastructure, that's something that's often outside of funding like Advanced Propulsion Centre funding, for instance, because that only focuses on the car, not on the charging. But if we want to help to scale that up into a production line environment, then this fund would be for you, for instance. So hopefully that gives you some ideas as to where that's focused. Dan, if you can move on to the next slide, please. There's the second strand is the innovation to deployment strand. And essentially this is where you are pulling together existing technologies that are already on the market, but you are combining them to integrate them to offer new value in a market. Okay, so it's very much an integration